All right, welcome everyone to part 2 here in creating a weapon customization system inside of UE4. In the last video, we prepared a blueprint. This is it here in the middle of the world here. And in here, we have a couple of variables inside of this blueprint, which allow me to go and switch up which weapon is here and which attachment is here. We also have a little bit of a check to make sure that if the scope here is what's selected, then using the Colt will not allow us to put that on. The reason for this, we don't want an upside down scope here on this weapon. So we've got to check to see if that works. Now, the idea here, this is only available to developers. This is not something our gamers are going to see. So we need some kind of interface on screen in order to control this blueprint and what it's doing. So I'm going to be treating this in a 3-stage process. We are going to be creating the message. This is what gets done when the user uses the UI, when they input some kind of information. So clicking on a button, for instance. The second stage is going to be dispatching that information that a button was clicked and that something was changed in the interface. And what that'll do is then we'll send that information over to our blueprint here, where we're going to be able to then alter any of the specifications in here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a game mode as a means of storing kind of global data, things that I want to keep track of that are related to the game and not necessarily our blueprint. So I'm going to go and create a blueprint class. I'm going to make this a game mode base. I'm going to call it GM for game mode underscore. I'll name it Gunsmith, the same name as our little system here. I'm going to try and name that correctly without the old A. There we are, Gunsmith. Okay, in here, it's going to be kind of an ongoing thing. I don't want to just kind of finish off what's going to be in the game mode here. I do want to just kind of get a couple of things set up, information that we're going to need, and then we can go and bounce back and forth from there. The first bit of information we need to transfer is which weapon has been selected. We are doing that via an enumeration data table here. So that's what we're going to reference. So my first variable is going to be called selected weapon. And this is going to be of a type enum underscore weapon list. Okay. So this is going to make a weapon list selection here that we can use. So the default here you can see is the Colt 19 and the HK is in there as well. Excellent. So that means that we've got some way of saving the information that we're going to send back and forth. I do have some attachments as well. So maybe we'll make another variable and we'll call this selected attachment. And I'm going to make this not a weapon list, but a enum underscore attachment list. Like so, again, referencing our own enum data tables so we can change things. So there we have where the data is going to be saved and which type of data we're going to be sending back and forth. The only other thing that we need is some way of communicating between the two, and that's called an event dispatcher. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create an event dispatcher. I'm going to call this ed underscore UI input. And we'll use this to communicate any of the input sent by the UI into our blueprint so that we can manufacture changes, make changes on the fly. With that done, let's begin making our UI. Now, I've already gone and imported a few images here. I'm not going to be worrying about the design of this system right now. I'm going to be just working on the functionality. So I want to get some UI buttons up. So I've got some really quick kind of paddle off little things here. Let's go and create a user interface widget blueprint. I'm going to call this WBP for widget blueprint, and I'll call it my HUD, HUD. And this is going to be what I draw on screen when the game plays. Now, speaking of which, let's go set that part up as well. I don't want to hit play here. I'm going to go into blueprints and level blueprints, and there's some things that we're going to want to do here. So first, I'm just going to move these other little systems down here. These are not in use at the moment. Nothing is wired in. And this came with the map content. So it's not something I'm actually interested in using. So here we have our event begin play. And the first thing I'm going to do is get a reference to our player controller. And this is, let's see, player controller. There we are. And from here, we can actually go and change the input mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set input mode to UI only. Now, when this happens, it means that the player won't be able to move as though they were in first person. So it kind of locks the camera in place wherever the camera happens to be. And it does this for the player controlling that system. So that's what we're going to do there. The next thing that we're going to want to do, we're going to want to use the player controller here again. And I'm going to add a reroute here to try and keep this clean, and a reroute here to keep this clean. And we'll bring this up. So the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the mouse is always going to be visible. So I'm going to set show mouse cursor to true. And what this means is that the system, even when it's locked into UI mode, our mouse won't disappear like it was a touchscreen interface or something. We'll always see the cursor on screen. Lastly, there's one more thing I need to do from the player controller, and that is to add our HUD to the screen. So we're going to create an instance. So create Widget Blueprint. The class is going to be the one that we created, WBP HUD. We'll go and put that in there. And we're also going to wire up our owning player to here to be the same player controller like that. So let's go and give this a test. What should happen here when I hit play is the camera should be locked. WASD is not moving me anymore. I can't use the mouse to click and drag. All of my input is contained to UI. There's no UI on screen at the moment, but the system is locked, so that's good. Now I'm going to go into the widget blueprint, and there's two modes here. Designer mode, that's when we set up what everything's going to look like, and then graph mode, which is where we're going to go and change the behavior of the things that we've done. Now I'm going to do this with just the simplest of AI or UI, sorry, and just make something that is functional. So I'm going to do this with the use of buttons here, and I'm going to make two buttons at the top, which are going to represent the weapons that I'm using. We'll go and use the Colt image here. I'm going to go into the style, and we'll throw that image in, and I'm going to also ensure that I'm drawing as an image, and we'll size to content. So there's going to be these really oversized buttons here, but they'll work. That's going to function as well as I wanted to. So I'm just going to go put these in here for all of these and set it like that. There we are. So we'll go and save that. I'm going to also clone that button. So if I go back into my HUD here, we're going to go and rename this one button Colt. I'm going to go and duplicate it, which I'll put over here. And this one is not going to be Colt. This one's going to be MP5. And I will grab my MP5 image, and I'll go and sub out each of these. Okay, so we have two buttons. This is enough to actually demonstrate the full functionality of the system. We have one button that is going to send information to tell our system to be a Colt, to tell the skeletal mesh in place to be a Colt. And this button will tell it to use the MP5 skeletal mesh. Let's go work on the functionality here. I'm going to go to the graph, and I'm going to remove all of these. To start off with, we're going to use the pre-construct, and I'm going to just get a reference to our game mode. So I'm going to get game mode. This is the currently used game mode in the game. We're going to cast that to the one that we made, Gunsmith. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a variable from this. So this is going to be a reference now to our gun mode, or to our game mode. Now, the reason I do this is that I'm only casting one time now, and cast isn't all that expensive, but there is a cost associated with it. So I don't want to cast every single time a button is clicked. Here, I'm only going to cast when this UI system is built, and then I have a reference to what was cast. And so I can actually use this down the road here when I want to do anything else. Let's implement our buttons. So I'm going to grab the Colt button, and I'm going to use on clicked. So when anybody clicks that Colt button, this is what's going to fire off. I'm going to do the same thing with the MP5 button here, on clicked, and we'll script these two things together. First things first, let's get the gun mode. Okay, this is a reference to what was cast up here. So we're just going to do this for each button. Now, excuse me, let's go set the data that we saved inside our game mode. Inside of our game mode, we saved two enum data types. We've got the selected weapon and selected attachment. So when the button for the Colt is pressed, we want to set the weapon, right? Selected weapon. Oh, I don't want to get, I want to set. Set selected weapon. Okay, so this is now going to allow us to set inside of the game mode which weapon we want to use. I'm actually just going to reuse this node down here as well because it is the same node. Only this time we'll use the drop down and select the MP5. So there, when the Colt button's pressed, it's going to change that variable to read Colt, and it's going to change it down here to read MP5. So both buttons now will change a variable. Now that variable is currently not being used in the blueprint, which means we're going to need to go and do that. We're going to need to reference our blueprint. So in blueprints, we'll go and open this up. So here we have what was created in the last video, the simple construction script that goes and swaps out skeletal meshes or will swap out static meshes for the attachment. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break this. Now this logic works. I'm not going to delete it because the logic is there. And we can use that logic as we start building our event graph. So we're not going to use this in the construction script. We're going to use it in the event graph. So the first thing that we want to do is we have this event dispatcher, UI input. And what we want to have happen is we want to make it so that once the button has been clicked and we've gone and set our variable inside of our game mode, we're then just going to tell that event dispatcher to fire off. So we're going to call ed UI input. So there, that'll tell our system that a selection has been made in the UI. Something has been changed in the UI. Now, I'm going to do this using only just one event dispatcher. I'm going to send the information across regardless as to what information is being changed. This is going to give us a little bit more versatility here in that we're not going to have event dispatchers all over the place. So there. So something like this is going to, on clicked, change our skeletal mesh, at least the name of what's being used in the enum data table, to the Colt. And then it's going to go tell the UI input to fire off. Okay, so the UI input, which is in here, we want to listen to this in our weapon. So to begin with, in the weapon, I'm going to do a couple of things. First, let's get our game mode because, again, that's something we want to have a variable for and prevents us from casting too many times. I'm going to cast it to the object type of our game mode, and then we'll just promote this to a variable as well. So now we have, again, a variable referencing our game mode. And this is where that information is stored. Now, in the construction script in the last video, we used just a local variable that would change the enum data. Let's copy this. This is the information we still want. Let's bring it into the event graph. I'm going to paste it down here. Get these guys out of here. So here's what we want to have happen again. We want to, again, switch based off our weapon enum, but this time we don't want to get the information from this blueprint. I'm going to go and delete these two variables, this one and this one. So now we have to get a variable from somewhere else, and we know where we save that variable. It's in the game mode. So if we get a reference to our game mode, and we now get selected weapon, this is the variable from the game mode. We can put this in here, and now this will change to either weapon based off the values reported here. Now we need a way of making this fire off, right? This is not a beginning statement. We need a red node to fire off the beginning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom event. I'll call this CE for custom event, and I'll call it UI input. And this will fire off in here. So now we can fire off our UI input whenever we want. What we're going to do is we're now going to tell the system when this should fire off. We're going to do that by listening to the event dispatcher in our gunsmith. So I'm going to pull out from here and we're going to bind event to event dispatcher UI input. So this event is going to get bound to that event dispatcher getting fired. So the game begins. We get a reference to our game mode and we're going to save it as a variable. Then we're going to start listening for when that node gets fired off. And when it gets fired off, this sequence of events will happen. This should now be fully functional. If I go here and I hit play, we see, oh, we don't see our UI. So let's go and fix that. The UI needs to be here inside of the level blueprint. So I'm going to go to blueprints, level blueprint, and this is where we need to fix this. So we've gone and set our UI mode. We've made sure the mouse is visible. We've created the widget, but we didn't tell it where to go. So I'm going to just pull it from here and we're going to add it to the viewport. And that'll make it draw on screen. So now we'll save that and hit play. And there, now we have our two buttons. So clicking the MP5 button, oh, it doesn't look like anything is happening at the moment. So let's go and check and see what's going on. Right, big slew of errors here. Let's go make sure we are paying attention to everything the right way. So we've got a button, call, that all looks correct. In here, begin play, gun mode, bind to event, get to gun mode, switch on enum, set the skill to match. Okay, so that is telling me logically that it is correct. Let's read the error here that comes up. Access none, trying to, oh, my bad. Okay. I skipped a little step. I created a game mode, but I have not actually assigned the game mode to the game. I'm going to go to my world settings. You can do this by going settings, world settings, and we need to tell the game mode override to use our game mode. Otherwise, the cast that I'm doing, both in the UI and in the blueprint for the weapon, both of them are failing because getting the current game mode is not assigned to my gunsmith. So now we can try this. And there we go. We have functional UI buttons. It is now swapping between those two little bits of information. Now, this is how all UI systems are going to work in this regard. I'm not going to go any further in depth with this. This is essentially setting up the transmission of information. So what we've got is in our designer, we've got our buttons. We're then in the graph sending some variable type, some information that we want across to the game mode. And the game mode, again, is going to then send that back into our weapon blueprint where it's going to go make the changes we want. So this is a pretty easy system to set up. There's really not much else beyond this, beyond putting in what kind of interface you want, what kind of system you're going to see on screen, and then going and making the appropriate changes. Now, the only other change here that I want to display, something that I can show you to do as well, is inside of our firearm material. So this is my master material created in the last video that has the information here required. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start storing in the alpha channel of my base color. So if I go over to the pistol diffuse map or base color map here, and I go and look at what's in the alpha channel, this is completely white at the moment. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to re-import this because I believe I've already made the changes to this. And we'll go take a look. No. So it's not saved. So we'll go and make these changes here as necessary. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and open up that firearm base color. Here it is here. And I'm going to go into my channels. We're going to add a alpha channel. And what I want to do here is have some kind of a paint mask. Now you can generate this inside of Painter by painting on the weapon. It just needs to be a black and white image that is going to resemble what the paint job is going to look like. So I'm gonna kind of manually make something here. I'm just gonna go and run a couple of filters to get something. I'm not going to bother with Substance Painter for this. I would in the final project, but to get the system up and running, I'm not really going to do that. So I'm just going to go and render some clouds. I'm going to hit Control L to go into the levels here, and we're just going to clamp this, bring it as two-tone as possible so that we get black and we get white. And then I'll save this out, and this needs to be a targa for this to work. And so I'll go and save it like that and make sure that it's 32-bit. That way I get my alpha information stored in the right place. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-import this image. I'm going to do this with a new file though, because I need that TGA that was created instead of the PNG, because I put it in an alpha channel and the PNG just doesn't have that. So that's going to be this one here. So when I open this up, we should now see that black and white mask for adding paint to this thing. So that's what I'm going to do. Inside of my master material, I'm first going to create a vector, which I'm going to call paint color. I'm going to create a linear interpolation between the paint color and our base color. And I'm going to use the alpha channel in order to do that. So what this is going to do is where the alpha channel is white, we should see one image, and where it's black, we should see the other. So we'll go and save this here. Now we're not going to see it in the display, and that's because I changed the texture associated with my pistol, and this texture is associated with the laser. So it's not actually going to change anything here. But let's go look in the world, and you can actually see there is a black paint job on the weapon now. This paint color is going to give me the ability of manipulating and changing the different paint jobs on the weapon. The way that I'm going to need to do that, we can go and close this. This is going to be a really simple version of this, but you'll see the process here. I'm going to turn that off. This is the level blueprint. Let's just close everything, and I'll only open what is necessary here. So we need our blueprint for the weapon. And now what I'm going to do is in the construction script, instead of what we were doing before that manipulates the meshes, instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the weapon and I'm going to create a dynamic material instance for this weapon. Now the dynamic material instance is going to take whichever material I so choose. In this case, I'll take my Colt material instance, and we're going to make an instance of that. I'm going to promote this to a variable so that we can go and manipulate our paint in a moment. This is going to be paint. What is this? No, this is dynamic material. Dynamat. There we go. So there. That's going to create a dynamic material instance and assign it to our pistol. What I want to do now is I would like to have the ability to change the color on that paint. And so we can do that by any means. We need a UI. So I'm going to go to my UI, and we're going to need something in the HUD. I'm in the designer here. So we can go and do this with any manner of systems, right? I can go and put a little square box in here, which I could tell that square box to be red. And when the user clicks the red, the color of the paint turns red. So I can actually set up as many different colors here as I wanted or allowed the user to use, giving them kind of a little bit of control that way. Another thing that I could do would be to use a slider. So if I brought a slider in, we could use this to affect the color of the red paint. So going in and setting up that information like this, there's now a red slider. In the graph, we would do the same thing here. So there's our slider. And what we're going to do is we are going to get its value changed. So whenever the user changes the value, we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to get our gunsmith reference, and we're going to call at the end. But what we need to do now is set the variable. So here's the variable contained in that slider. It's a value between 0 to 1. It's a normalized value. That's perfect for setting a red value. All we need to do is store that red value somewhere. So in our game mode is where we're storing our values. This is where I've got my enum data. So we're going to go and store, in this case, this would be a float. So we'll go and create a float. Okay, and we're going to call this paint R value. And I could build one of these for the green and for the blue and give the user the ability to play with those. But essentially what's going to happen, that's been nice and saved now, is that when the user goes and changes that, right, we're going to red. We're going to set paint red value. And we'll change the value of this variable with whatever value is coming out of the slider. And then again, we can go and just call our UI has updated and have that just trickle through. So if I do that, that red slider will change. What's it going to change? Well, we go to our blueprint. And right now, it's not changing anything. So we're looking for information here based off the weapon. If I were to create a sequence, we can fire the sequence off. And the first thing that'll happen is we'll check to see which mesh we're using. The second thing that happens is we get our dynamic material. And we're going to set vector parameter value. That vector parameter value is going to come from our gunsmith game mode. Get the paint red value, and then we're going to split this and put the red in here. So there, that'll actually set this the right way. I need to tell it the name of the variable. I haven't done that just yet. I believe it was paint color that I created. Let's go look in our materials. It's this very note at the top here. Paint color with my very peculiar spelling of paint. There we are. Okay, so that's what we're going to put in here, paint color. And we'll spell all of that correctly too. And there, what that's going to do is it's going to change the variable in our material that controls the red color. So we'll plug that into red. Now this will have a little bit of a different setup when you have more colors in there, because you don't want to change the blue and green to 0 when you change the red. But what this should give me the ability to do is turn that paint red. And so this is going to give us the ability now to play around with different paint jobs, different setups for which meshes are visible, and what have you. Again, the most complicated element here is just sending that information back and forth between the two systems. And in this case, it's all done with our game mode. Just remember to set your game mode in the world settings, and then any variable that you wish to send across from any blueprint to any other blueprint, you can store here in the game mode. I hope that's been helpful. We're going to continue with this project down the road, where we're going to be adding some visual effects and adding some sound effects. And so stay tuned for that, and hope to see you next time.